Hi, everybody. Welcome to AMS 533, Numerical Methods and Algorithms in Computational Biology. I'm David Green, who will be your instructor for this class. This initial lecture or video is meant to really introduce the class, to give you a feel for who I am, my background, and what I hope how I hope the class will be structured and what I hope you learn out of it. First, let me start off just giving you a little bit of an introduction to myself. My name is, as I said, David Green. I'm a faculty member in the Applied Math and Statistics Department at Stony Brook. But my background is not in applied math. I started off my scientific career as an undergraduate working in experimental chemistry labs. I did a bit of work in experimental carbohydrate chemistry, as well as a bit in organometallic chemistry, with a couple of papers from that period. And then I, in graduate school, shifted into the computational side of things. I actually started that transition towards the end of my undergraduate. But by the time I started my graduate work, I was fully immersed in the computational biophysics side of things. As my career progressed, especially as I reached the end of grad school and entered into postdoc period, I became more interested and more aware of the more numerical and algorithmic side of things, and how important a connection there was between the numerical tools, the algorithmic tools, and the problems we were able to solve. I think in the early days when I started getting involved in computational biology and computational chemistry, I sort of took the tools as a given and thought of them more just as tools that we could use, and didn't think so deeply about what the tools enable you to do and how the choice of tools impacts the choice of science that you can do. This became more aware to me, more apparent to me around the time I started my postdoc. And by the time I was starting to look for faculty positions, it was a real part of what my thought process regarding science was. When I was looking for faculty positions, I had cast a very broad net. I was considering positions in chemistry departments, in biochemistry departments, in pharmacology departments, and even in the applied math department that I ended up in. A big part of my choice to come to Stony Brook was my knowledge of some of the people who were here, and my confidence that the university was a place that would really nurture the kind of deeply interdisciplinary work that is essential to the field of computational biology. So that's a little bit about me. Now let me get into describing the class a bit. In order to help me do this, I want to write some things down. And so I'm going to switch to a screen share, to a blank screen where I can write things for you. All right. Okay, so one of the things that I want to really drive home throughout this semester is the really intense interdisciplinary nature of the field of computational biology. The name gets you partway there, that there's computation and there's biology, but there's so much more to the field. And it's one of the things that both makes it an incredibly challenging area of study, but also an incredibly rewarding one. Very loosely, we might categorize the groups of the ways of thinking about the field into two general groups. Sorry. There are people who focus primarily from the experimental side of things, right? And that the way that they're thinking about problems is driven by experiments. Biologists, chemists, and biochemists, clinicians. There should be an N there. Clinicians, medical scientists who work with patients. And on the other side, there is more of the theory, math, modeling side of things, probably and this group also actually includes a fairly wide range of people. Mathematicians, both applied and otherwise. Physicists, engineers, and computer scientists. And these groups of people all have made really important contributions to the field. And in some ways, you can't understand the whole of computational biology without understanding some of all of these areas and the interplay between them. Right? There are ideas that are drawn from artificial intelligence, from electrical engineering, from computer vision. There are models drawn from physics. There are tools drawn from applied math. And these are applied to ideas and problems from biology. But the directionality is not one way. Ideas from biology also can inform the theory and the math. Biology poses complex problems that inspire new computational techniques, that require you to develop new computational techniques. In some cases, how biology has solved a problem, so to speak, can be used as an inspiration for an algorithm. A little bit later in the class, we'll talk about genetic algorithms, which are a perfect example of this. There's also completely new fields that have been growing out of the true synthesis of these two areas. Synthetic biology is one where really the target is a higher level of bioengineering, of biological engineering that really takes deep understanding of the underlying systems, very quantitatively accurate, quantitatively predictive models, and then trying to use those to engineer truly new biological systems. And on the other side, biological computing, using the tools of biology to try to actually do certain forms of computing. DNA computing is one aspect of that, but there's also some very interesting applications in teaching cells to do basic sorts of computations in terms of developing sensors and stuff, which of course also ties back into some of the synthetic biology areas. Right? Because of this deep interdisciplinarity, it takes time to really immerse yourself into this field. Years and years to really get a complete sort of handle on even sort of sub aspects of it. So my hope in this class is not to make any of you deeply experts in the field, but to start the process of how you can bring together these seemingly diverse fields into a consistent intellectual framework, consistent scientific framework for you to solve problems. And the details will come as you gain experience in the field. There are really two main goals that I would like to have everybody pull out of this course. The first is to understand the process involved in developing mathematical solutions to problems. That is, how do we go from a biological problem into a mathematical solution, into a computational implementation of that mathematical model. There are multiple pieces of this. Two of the big things I want to emphasize are how to choose an appropriate model. That is, how do we go from biology as a incredibly complex, heterogeneous domain into a well-defined model that we can work with in a more abstract way. Right? There are almost always many possible modeling frameworks that we can choose from of various levels of complexity. There is always a necessity to make approximations. How do we know which approximations are reasonable? Which approximations are not reasonable? This isn't always about accuracy, at least in a conventional sense. There are sometimes cases where making an approximation that we know to be wrong can be a reasonable thing to do. If we don't believe that approximation, or if we can show that approximation won't qualitatively affect our predictions. It might have a very significant quantitative impact, but it might not. But it might still allow us to gain deep insight. More accurate is not always better in terms of a choice of a model. In addition to thinking about how we choose a model for a problem, we also are going to have to choose a method or an algorithm, or more than one. That is, typically when we write down a mathematical model, I say mathematical model because that's usually the language we use to write them, although they're often derived from ideas in physics and chemistry. Once we write down a model, it's generally the case that we can't work with it without computational infrastructure. That requires another level of approximations. The numerical approximations underlying maybe simulating a model, or the imperfections in the algorithms that might be used to query the model. The problem we're faced with is how to choose the right model and the right method for the particular problem we're interested in. And there will be considerations we need to make about the strengths and weaknesses about each model and each method, the costs of each of them. But one of the things that I'm hoping to focus on as we move through the course is that these two decisions are not independent. It's not a matter of simply deciding this is the model I want to use and this is the method I'm going to work with it. There are many computational methods that require a certain structure to the underlying model to be applicable. And so it may be the case that you choose a model because you want to use a particular algorithm. You feel the algorithm is very well suited to solve the problem of interest, and that can inform your choice of the model. It can go the other way. It can also be the case that you have a model that you believe is the correct model to use for the problem you're trying to solve. And that can constrain your choice of methods and algorithms. Right? All right. Part of this process of figuring out which model, which method, is a question that we often don't think of nearly enough. And that is the question of what question do we want to answer? And this might seem like not much of a question. You might have a intuition that what is science about? It's about posing a question and then trying to solve it. Sure, there's lots of questions out there, but we usually select a question that we want an answer to, and then we try to dig into it to figure that out. And that's very true to a point. But there's many different ways that you can phrase a question, and different angles you can take to look at one larger problem. And what has been noticed is, many have noticed, is that if you look at how science progresses, right? If we try to sort of draw some arbitrary sort of time axis and some measure of progress in overall domain within a specific subfield or so on, typically what you tend to see is that there are periods of slow incremental growth where more stuff is being learned all the time. We're gaining information, we're developing new tools, we're kind of learning more about the field. And I'm sketching this as linear. I'm not sort of suggesting that it necessarily has to be, but given that we're using a kind of a made up axis with no real units, that's kind of irrelevant. But occasionally there are these big shifts where a lot of progress in a field is made over a small period of time. Right? And most often there are two primary reasons that these kind of major shifts in the field can occur. One of them can be new technologies. The development of high throughput sequencing, for example, drastically changed the field of genetic and genomic research in a very short period of time. New methods were developed that completely changed the kinds of questions that could be asked, and thus you made huge leaps forward in understanding. Right? But another part of these big shifts can come from a new perspective. That is a question that has been on the table for a long period of time, is looked at from a new point of view. Somebody takes that problem, turns it around, and says, hey, we can ask this question from a little bit of a different perspective. We can tweak the question a little bit. And maybe not answer exactly the same question that we've been trying to, but ask a very closely related question. And sometimes a closely related question is answerable, whereas the one that people have been sort of banging their heads against isn't. And simply that recognition that there's a new way of thinking about a problem that opens up a solution can make big impacts on a field. An early example that we're going to see in this class is the development of computational protein design as an emergent field out of the general field of structural biology and protein folding and so on. So if this is how big advances in science work, and I also don't want to downplay this incremental progress, actually a tremendous amount of what we know comes from these phases of incremental progress, and that is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, to be working in that mode. But I think we're all excited, inspired, hoping to make bigger contributions. One way to phrase your thinking about that, to be more open to those major paradigm shifts in a field, is to be open to new perspectives. How do you get new perspectives? You have to have multiple, you have to have a broad viewpoint of how you treat science, how you think about problems. Interdisciplinarity is key. And so one of the secondary goals that I really want to be able to develop in everybody is a cross-disciplinary communication framework. We are going to discuss in this class problems from multiple different perspectives. We are going to motivate problems from the biology. We're not going to shy away from the biology. We are going to discuss what the real problems are, and we're going to really try to make sure that we understand what the underlying biological problems we are, or that we have are. We are going to, in many cases, develop our models from physics, from the tools of physics and of physical chemistry. We're going to use the language of physics to do that. We're going to talk about the underlying principles that motivate the models in the way that a physicist would talk about those models. We are going to write down these models using the language of math. And again, we're not going to shy away from using the proper terminology, the proper notation to describe problems in a mathematical framework. We are then going to apply these methods computationally, and we are going to, probably the best way to phrase this is with the broad term of computational science. We are going to discuss numerical methods. We are going to discuss the algorithms that we can use to solve our problems using the language of computational science. We'll talk about complexity of algorithms. We'll talk about memory demands and CPU burden. Right? We're going because these are important for being able to really feel what we can do and what the limitations of what we can do are. Right? We're not going to end at this point. We are going to start with biology, use physics and chemistry to develop models, use math to write those models down in a formal notation. And we are going to use the tools of computational science to query those models. And then we are going to think about how we can interpret results. How can we learn something about the biological system going back in this? How do we phrase the problem so that our answers inform the biological problems we were working with? All right. So there's two main goals that we've discussed. One is developing this feeling, this intellectual structure for how we develop a model and a modeling framework for biological problems. Secondly, emphasizing using the right language to discuss this. This isn't just as an exercise in interdisciplinarity for yourself. The main reason, one of the main reasons why I want to sort of drive this, to talk about biology in the language of biology, to talk about physics in the language of physics and so on, is because in order to work in this field, you need to talk with people who are coming from many, many different backgrounds. You will work with people who are experimental biologists who do not think about problems in computation or in math at all. And you need to be able to communicate with that person. In order to be able to communicate with that person, you need to understand their language, their way of thinking. You need to understand enough of biology to have that conversation. You will also interact with people who are who work on numerical methods for the sake of working on numerical methods, who don't know anything about biology, and who are purely computational scientists. Again, you need to be able to speak to them to understand what tools they have. Are their tools applicable to the problem you are interested in or not? If they're applicable, are they applicable kind of straight out of the box, or might some tweaking be involved? That kind of communication requires enough of an understanding of the field, the language of the field, that you're able to engage with these with such an individual. This is not to say that you need to become as knowledgeable about all of these fields as people who have specialized in them are, but you need to have enough of a familiarity with the language, the thinking, the problem-solving approaches that these different fields take in order to engage in meaningful uh, conversation. Sorry. All right. Those are very general purpose, or sorry, general concepts of what we aim to cover in the class. Let me talk a little bit now about how we will be structuring the class and how it will be graded and so on. Obviously, this is an online class. I enjoy teaching this class in person. It's one of the classes I most enjoy in teaching in person, in fact. But due to current circumstances, it's understandable that we're doing this over screens. That's not really going to change the fundamental structure of the class in much of any way. I will be recording lectures like these videos, and you'll be able to, these will be available to you to watch your own convenience. I'm not going to give traditional lectures. This is a little bit different than what I've done in the past, and actually I'm a little bit I'm quite happy about the motivation to put these to record these and have them for offline viewing, as I think it can stimulate discussion a bit more. So I will give lectures on material to introduce you to the ideas, the problems that we're trying to solve. You'll be able to watch these on your own time. We will use, so we might call this a flipped classroom mode. What this means is that, again, videos you watch on your own time, and our class time will be dedicated to discussions, right? Now, I'm going to see how things go through this semester. It's a relatively small class. I will every week be at the Zoom classroom and open up the Zoom classroom at its starting time. And we'll just start discussing things. I'll answer questions you have. Maybe I'll push the discussion a little bit. And we can have that time to discuss whatever problems people wish. I know that there are people who are kind of all over the place in terms of their time availability. There are people who may be in different time zones. There may be people who have various other sort of time constraints and time pressures on them, partly because of all of this whole COVID mess that we're in. And so I also want to be aware of that. I don't want to force people to be up in the middle of the night because of where their time zone is for a discussion. And so I really want to augment these in-class discussions with more asynchronous discussion modes as well. These will be, for example, a discussion board that will be hosted on Piazza that I hope everyone will engage in. We may make use of some other tools, things like Voice Threads is a interactive kind of online thing where you can record little video or audio snippets to have a little bit more of a conversation with somebody or with a group of people, but in a way that doesn't require you to be all in the same place at the same time. So this is going to facilitate our discussion. Discussion is important here, right? How do we get interdisciplinary communication skills? We get that by communicating, by discussing the problems and working through them in that way. The grading of the class is going to be based on really 3 chunks. 40% of the class will be graded on, sorry, and then this pen just isn't working out so great for me today. 40% of the class will be based on computational problem sets. These are assignments where you are going to be asked to either to work with a problem in MATLAB as a modeling framework. Some problems you'll be given a framework where a lot of MATLAB code is already there, and you have to implement a sub portion of the problem. Other problems you may be asked to sort of implement a model from scratch. But these are problems where you're going to implement a model of a biological system using the tools that we've discussed in class, and then do a series of computational experiments to explore either the limitations and capabilities of the algorithm, or to gain biological insight, or some combination of the two. But really a computational numerical method kind of focused problem set. Another 40% will be on conceptual assignments. What these are going to be a series of assignments through the semester where I ask you to explain in varying levels of detail one of the methods that we've discussed. Right? These might be one of the modeling frameworks, it might be one of the algorithms, it might be sort of how we bridge these together. And these will be multimedia in nature. Not all for each assignment, but I'll give you, for example, one assignment where I ask you to write 2 pages giving a detailed explanation of some particular numerical method. I may give you another assignment where I ask you to record a video where you, say a 5-minute video, teaching about one of the methods or the concepts we've discussed in class, right? And that sort of thing, right? So together, these are maybe the you might say the intellectual assessments, the conceptual side of things. Are you understanding the ideas? Are you able to explain them? Are you able to communicate them clearly through written word, through spoken word, and so on? And can you use the tools? Can you actually implement them in a computer program and get meaningful results and understand the output of those? That obviously only adds up to 80%. The last 20% is based on participation. This is particularly participation in the discussions, participation in the online discussion board, participation in the in-class discussion sessions, and so on. I understand that there may be a range of comfort levels. Some people may be much more comfortable participating in the online forums, and some people may be more comfortable participating in the in-person sessions. I'm going to see how it goes. In a normal class, I would say that's fine. Or in a large class, I would say that that's perfectly fine. This is a fairly small class, and I do have to kind of be aware, and I'm going to be sort of on the lookout for which modes of participation seem to be most effective. And I may give a little bit of a push to either push us more into the discussion board type mode of discussion, or others, depending on what seems to be working out well. This 20% participation, if you're interested in the class, if you're engaged in the class, if you're trying, if you're communicating with me, with your colleagues, you're going to get full credit for that. Okay. So for the last little bit, let me just spend a couple of minutes discussing the kind of biology that we are going to be handling in the class. I mean, biology is a huge field. It ranges everything down from very, very low level electron transfer reactions occurring inside things like the photosystems of chlorophyll, up to evolutionary timescale events over the whole globe. That's biology. It covers an immense set of timescales, an immense set of distance scales. We are going to focus our discussion of computational biology in a fairly limited range. We will discuss molecular biology from the level of thinking about the underlying molecules, the structures of proteins, the structures of DNA. How can we use computational methods to query structures of macromolecules and their interactions, and so on. We will build up from the molecular biology of the biology of individual molecules into the biology of networks of molecules, biochemical kinetics, and so on, up into the level of cells. Right? And so you can sort of, we'll discuss models for networks of chemical reactions within cells, subsets of those reaction networks, subsets of gene regulatory networks, and so on, and towards cellular level models and even small multicellular models. But we're going to kind of limit ourselves in this general range of the molecular biology, cellular biology range of problems, from biological macromolecules up to cells and small communities of cells. We're not going to be looking at low-level chemistry. We're not going to be looking at organismal biology or ecosystems biology. A lot of the methods that we use can be transferable to those methods, but are those different domains of biology. But we simply don't have the time to get into any of that in any meaningful detail. All right. One last thing, I actually meant to include this in my list of outcomes that I hope for the class, but I somehow have skipped over that. The last thing that I really do hope that you will be getting out of this, and let me sort of switch off my screen sharing now, is as we go through the class, we'll be starting with atomistic modeling, modeling of individual molecules. We'll discuss the tools that we need to, that we can use to solve problems in that arena. We will move on to systems of biochemical equations, biochemical networks, gene regulatory networks, and discuss the tools and methods involved in studying those, and then move up into more cellular systems and discuss the tools and methods involved in those. As we build through this process, one thing that you will see is that often the same tools are used in multiple different circumstances. The same methods are going to come up over and over again, sometimes in a very similar framework or used in a very similar way, sometimes where we need to make some adjustments, where maybe the same underlying idea comes into play, but we can't implement it in exactly the same way because of different constraints. So because of this repetition, that we will be seeing the same tools used repeatedly throughout the semester, another thing that you will end up with at the end of the class is kind of a toolbox of computational methods, of numerical methods that you understand, that you know the kinds of problems that they can be applied to, that you know how they can be implemented, and that you can then use to solve problems in your own work when they come up. All right. So with that, I'm done this introductory video. I'm very looking forward to this semester, to meeting all of you, to sharing my insights into this field, a field that I am incredibly excited about, and that I hope all of you will come to be equally excited about if you aren't already. Many of you already may be. And I really, really hope that this is going to be a rewarding experience for everybody. I understand that this medium isn't ideal for a lot of reasons, but it's what we're working with, and we will make this work. So with that, I will wrap up. Stay tuned for accompanying future videos where we start really digging into the material of the class. Take care and goodbye.